So now it's come down to the vote. And you have two sides, Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Federalists are going to be those in support of the new Constitution. The Anti-Federalists are going to be against the new Constitution. Federalists are going to want ratification. The Anti-Federalists are not. Now, knowing full well that the state legislatures would almost certainly veto the new Constitution, Founding Fathers, as the book calls them, or the framers, as I would say, sent copies of the Constitution out to state conventions where it could be debated and voted upon. What we had was, instead of the state legislatures making the decision, we had basically groups, conventions of people from around the state making the decision. The idea for this was the fact that the state legislature, if they voted for the Constitution, would mean they were giving up their power. And as a result, human nature being what it is, very few people would do that. Most people, if they have some form of power, have a tendency to want to hold on to it. So there was the concern that if the state legislature was who was going to vote, they would vote it down just to maintain their own power. Instead, they wanted to send it out to the people. They wanted the people to judge the Constitution for themselves. They wanted the people to make the decision. They didn't want the state legislatures to do it. But instead, they thought that the people, if shown the Constitution, if they were able to see what had been drafted in Philadelphia, the way they were creating a new government, that the people would support it. The people would judge for themselves that, yes, this needed to be ratified. Now, the American people, however, were somewhat shocked. Now, they had expected some form of patched up version of the Articles of Confederation. That, remember, the whole purpose of this meeting was to revise the Articles. Instead, here they come with a brand new Constitution nobody's ever seen before. So while they expected that patched up version of the Articles, they received a brand new Constitution. Remember, the convention had held its meetings in secret, okay? They didn't want to be talking about what was happening, what they were thinking, what they were doing. They didn't want to be influenced by popular, mob consent at the moment. They wanted to think this through as best they could and then present it to the American people to decide for themselves. They had done a very good job at keeping things quiet. Even Ben Franklin, who was known to, in his later years, to talk out of turn, as it were, even he didn't share a lot of secrets at that point in time. So the American people now are going to have to make the themselves. Now, the Federalists, they favored the proposed stronger government, okay? They were against the Anti-Federalists, who were opposed to the Constitution, as I said. So you got to remember, the Federalists, they are in favor. The Anti-Federalists, they are against. Okay, they both had reasons as to why they were supporting the Constitution, and they had their reasons why they were against it. And some of these would be written out. For example, you would have what are called the Federalist Papers. These are 85 essays written by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, explaining to the people of New York why they should support the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists would have their own. There were papers written by the pen name Brutus, and would talk about the reasons why it was a bad idea. So you basically have two sides, much like any political campaign, trying to convince the people that their point of view is the correct one, that they are the ones that have got this figured out, and they are the ones to whom you should listen. Now, the Federalists were more respectable. They had embraced the culture and propertied groups. More than one of them were former loyalists. Okay, so these were people who some of them had remained loyal to the crown, but had come over to the American side, the American way of thinking. Okay, generally speaking, they were going to live closer to the coasts and in the older areas. Okay, so these are the people that are going to be pushing for ratification. On the other side, Federalists, okay? Now, they cried, truthfully, that it was drawn up by an aristocratic element and was therefore anti-democratic. But at the same time, the same aristocratic element that they talked about included people like George Washington, who was a very popular figure among the people. So while they were honest in saying that it was drawn up in secret and whatnot, and that went against the concept of democracy, you still had to look at who the framers were who actually had done the drawing up here. Anti-Federalists were mostly poor farmers, the less literate or illiterate, states' right devotees. It was basically the poorer classes who lived westward toward the frontier. So the further west you went, the stronger the anti-Federalist attitude was. The more you were on the coast in the older areas, the stronger the Federalist position was. The Anti-Federalists also decried the dropping of annual elections for congressional representatives and the erecting of what would become Washington, D.C., the creation of a standing army. There were a lot of things that people were concerned with. But it came down to needing 9 states to approve it. And it was Delaware who stepped up to the plate and became the first state to ratify the Constitution. 6 months later, we got our 9th state. It took 6 months from the 1st to the 9th. Now, the question was, what happens after that? Does it go into effect even for those states who didn't vote for it? Or do those states just become their own little nations? Or what happens? The good news was all 13 states would eventually ratify the Constitution and it would go into effect. The sun that had been on George Washington's chair that whole time could now be said to be a rising sun. It was the dawn of a new era. The Articles of Confederation had been washed away, and the time of the U.S. Constitution was coming into effect. That same Constitution has now been in effect for more than 200 years. We have made some changes to it, 27 over the course of time, but generally speaking, it has held up well. It has been a document that has served the people and maintained our democracy. We are a republic, and we shall remain one.